Well, good afternoon, everyone. Happy Leap Year Day. Hope everyone's celebrating leap year in their own special way. I'm Andy Klein. I'm with Alaska Seaplanes, and we're really excited and honored to once again be a sponsor of the Innovation Summit. Just got to hear a little bit of the discussions that was happening in this breakout room. Fascinating stuff happening. So I hope you're all enjoying the Innovation Summit so far, and we've got a really interesting and valuable luncheon presentation for you. And that is going to be with Rear Admiral Megan Dean. Rear Admiral Dean has assumed the duties of Commander, 17th Coast Guard District in June of 2023. In addition to being responsible for all Coast Guard operations throughout Alaska, she also oversees Coast Guard operations in the Bering Sea, the Arctic Ocean, and the North Pacific Ocean, big territory. She is going to come on, speak a little bit, and then she'll be introducing Zachary Schulman, who is a really fascinating person that is working as a civilian for the USCG and works on strategic planning for them. So without further ado, Rear Admiral Megan Dean.
That is a really big me. So good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to say thank you to Brian Holst, Executive Director of the Juneau Economic Development Council, and the JADC for the opportunity to be part of this year's Innovation Summit. I'd also like to thank the City and Borough of Juneau, really for welcoming our Coast Guard members and their families into this local community. Your warm welcome and support is why so many of us choose to permanently put down roots here. This past December, I had the great opportunity to sit down with Brian. During our conversation, he mentioned the upcoming 2024 Innovation Summit and highlighted the focus on scenario thinking, which got me to thinking about my meaningful experience with scenario thinking as a member of the U.S. Coast Guard's Project Evergreen 3. I promise I won't step on the Coast Guard Director of Project Evergreen, Mr. Zachary Schulman's toes by filling in too many of the details, especially because Project Evergreen has matured and changed since the decade plus that I participated. I will say, what still holds true is that Project Evergreen affords the Coast Guard the opportunity to analyze future problems in a risk-free environment and to tap into the power of strategic foresight, and it's just plain fun. Very briefly, I'll touch on my own experience with scenario thinking. Project Evergreen 3, which took place over a time period spanning 2010 to 2011, involved 5 different futures, set approximately 25 years in the future, so around 2035, in which the team identified what we thought the Coast Guard's future challenges and opportunities would be and strategic ways and means to address them to help inform Coast Guard strategy. I'll share a few of the future challenges and opportunities identified from Project Evergreen 3 with ties to both Alaska and the Arctic. I'll go down a bit of a list. Here were a couple of them. The Arctic is a resource free-for-all, but the United States may not have a seat at the negotiating table to protect its interests there. The Arctic will be an active, nearly year-round waterway. The Arctic is humming with activity, but a persistent and effective U.S. presence there is expensive and technologically challenging. Increased polar resource extraction, shipping, and tourism activity requires greater Coast Guard presence. Danger to global fish stocks, now widely recognized, results in a mandate for Coast Guard operations protecting fisheries. And I'll just say, based on those that we talked about, those opportunities and challenges we talked about in 2010, 2011, based on those, the United States now has a program of record for 3 new icebreakers called our Polar Security Cutters. And the other thing is serious attention is now being paid to the global impacts of illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing, IUU, to include increased enforcement efforts, not just by the U.S. Coast Guard, but by our international partners as well, to include Japan and Canada. And if anyone was wondering, there was only one mention of pandemics in 2010, 2011, and this was it. The U.S. Coast Guard needs a credible health infrastructure that protects its members and the public from pandemics. That was the one mentioned in 2010 to 2011. I would predict that particular challenge is more of a frequent flyer nowadays in Project Evergreen. But to find out about the latest and greatest with Project Evergreen, let me hand it off to our expert, the Coast Guard's Project Evergreen Director, Zach Schulman, joining us from Coast Guard headquarters in Washington, D.C. Over to you, Zach.
Thank you, Admiral. Good afternoon, everybody. I really wish I could be with you guys in person. I've spent a lot of time in my career working Arctic issues, about 15 years, and in Alaska is very near and dear to my heart. In fact, I left my Copper River fleece at home, so I wish, I really wish I could be with you in person. Thank you for the opportunity to have a brief conversation with you about Project Evergreen and how we've evolved in the intervening 10 years since Admiral Dean participated Project Evergreen 3. So let's get started. I got a couple windows open here, so please excuse me. All right, start with the first slide. So what we're going to do today, we're going to understand what strategic foresight is, and really more importantly, what it's not. Understand how we use it in Project Evergreen, and apply strategic foresight in thinking from like a practitioner's perspective. And hopefully through this process, you'll start thinking about how you guys can apply strategic foresight for your teams and help improve their strategic planning capabilities. So when we talk about strategic foresight and strategic thinking, scenario planning, you need to take a step back, understand where it sits in the pantheon of strategy, the 3 layers of strategy. As you can see up top, you have strategic foresight, which is in the 6+ years time horizon. And at the bottom, we've got strategic planning, which is the budgeting, we call it PPBE in the Coast Guard, and I think a couple other organizations do that as well. It's a pretty standard term, the annual congressional appropriation cycle, how people do their daily or annual budgeting. That kind of lives down at the bottom. In the middle, you've got something called strategic thinking, which is how the connectivity between the long-range futures, the 6 years plus out to the 25-year time horizon, and that connectivity with the daily operational planning and how you assign your funding for the next year. It's really that connective tissue, the strategic thinking, that is the most difficult thing to operationalize, the most difficult thing to do for any organization. We, as in the Coast Guard, we don't, if there's an area for improvement, it's there. So when you're thinking about how to apply scenario thinking and strategic foresight to your organizations, I would strongly encourage you to think about how you are connecting the long-term visions and the lessons you learn from this process that I'll be talking about in the next few slides into your actual implementation and impacts to your organizations at the resource planning and allocation level. So let's talk about what strategic foresight actually is. Really, it's just a way to help people deal with uncertainty. The future is always moving, as Yoda would like to say. Always moving, the future is. More importantly, it's not the same as forecasting. The term forecasting is often conflated with foresight. People think, and I'll explain in the next couple slides why it's different. But that's something I would encourage you to keep in mind, is that what we're doing is not forecasting. We are not, you're not being able to do stock picks based off the work that Evergreen does or the foresight work that you'd be doing in your teams. It serves to help organizations, like the Admiral said, identify long-term trends that will impact operations and product development. So foresight, something is done by many Fortune 500 companies. NASA does it, Ford does it, Amazon does it, Starbucks, pretty much any large corporation or government agency that has to worry about what is the long-term future going to do to my operations has some sort of foresight capability, even though they might not call it that. But it's a growing field that I strongly encourage people to look into if you're interested in how to get your organization prepared for the future. And like I said, it's really designed to inform people how to think, not what to think. And we're not telling people you go through this process and you will have the specific outcome and this is how you have to do it. No, it's just a way to manage uncertainty. And then finally, the basic business rule that we apply in Project Evergreen is that we don't really look at things inside of 5 years. 5 years. The reason is that you can do it. The methodology that is we use in Project Evergreen, you could apply it to things closer in, but then you start thinking about, you get captured by the present, the tyranny of the present that as we call it. it's just not as effective. And so really just to keep ourselves separate, isolated, and firewalled with the political process and the resourcing process, we really only look at stuff that's 5 years out and greater. Here's another graphical way to kind of describe the difference between foresight and forecasting. So foresight, you're starting from a single data point, the present, and you expand outwards into looking at many possible, plausible, and probable futures. Whereas with forecasting, you take the outcomes, a wide variety of outcomes, because starting from today, many things are possible, and you're trying to narrow that down to a specific point in space. Like, for an anecdote I like to use is a forecast would be taking a data point, such as, let's say, Elon Musk buying Twitter, and a forecast would be what is the impact on Facebook's share price 15 years in the future? Right, that is a forecast. You're taking a broad range of possibilities and narrowing it down to a specific point. A foresight approach would be the opposite. A foresight approach to that same data point and the same questions, what's the impact on Elon Musk buying Twitter? You may end up in a place where you think about the impacts on free speech in Southeast Asia in the year 2040. So you see a much broader scope of thinking. One of the risks of foresight, and you know in the center it says preferable. That's the preferable outcome and feature. It's really easy. It's a part of the human condition that you take what you know and you just do a straight line extrapolation out to what your preferred future is. And organizations, you have to be careful not to let the comfort, what you know and you're comfortable with, dominate your thinking when you're thinking about many plausible futures. And you'll hear that term a lot in this presentation, plausible. That's the realm that we like operating in. Here's another graphical, different way of looking at it. This is called the cone of uncertainty. And if you do any foresight training, you'll experience this many, many times. You start from today and you expand out into at least 4 different plausible features. And it's considered the best practice to use 4. And when we talk about scenarios, you can see them represented by the gray dots here. We generally like to use 4 because it shows different permutations of the way things can go. And it's a nice round number. It's not too much. It doesn't suck up that many resources to explore those scenarios. Like I said, you see here, we like to operate in the realm of the plausible. The possible, when you get into the possible, people start getting really nuts. For lack of a better term, they start getting out in deep future, aliens and stuff like that. Yes, it's possible, but it's not exactly plausible. By keeping your work constrained in the plausible, as practitioners, you are more likely to get a warmer reception from your client or the audience that you're trying to reach. So let's talk about how the Coast Guard operationalizes strategic foresight through Project Evergreen. The Admiral Evergreen's been around for a long time. We've been around for a little over 20 years, started in 2002 officially as Project Evergreen. Actually, the program started in 1999. It was called Project Longview then, but really took its modern form in 2002. We operate in 4-year cycles, like the Admiral said. She participated in Evergreen 3. We are currently in Evergreen 6. And through the process between Evergreen 3 and Evergreen 6, we evolved into from a 4-year cycle to a kind of an 8-year A-B cycle. And I'll explain a little bit what that means in a bit. We operationalize strategic foresight for the Coast Guard, and we are considered in the federal government to be the gold standard. I wish I paid Peter Skoblich to write that, but he didn't. You can look at the Harvard Business Review article, describes in pretty good detail about what we do, and we're honored to be considered one of the leading programs in the interagency and in the U.S. as well. We started Evergreen 5 really was the kind of the inflection point where we took a really strong evolution away from the 4-year cycles toward the 8-year cycle. And the reason we do an 8-year A-B cycle is we realized in Evergreen 5, when we did the broad horizon scanning, like looking at what's in the realm of risk and opportunities out to the year 2042, that there are lots of possibilities. In fact, 17 of which, and these are all available to be viewed at the Evergreen 5 report, which is publicly available and downloadable on the RAND website. And we realized that there's some things that we need to take a deeper dive on, but that takes a lot of time. So we took a subset of the 17 recommendations, which I'll describe in a bit, and decided to spend the odd number evergreen cycles doing broad scanning, and then the even number is doing deep dives into a subset of those topics to really help the organization grapple with some of these risks. So with the Evergreen 5, which is the broad scanning iteration, the A cycle, resulted in 10, we call them workshops, we call them pine cones. We learned, branding is important. We did 10 pine cone workshops, over 300 subject matter experts, resulting in 17 recommendations and 3 strategic observations, so totaling 20. And this we directly informed Admiral Fagan when she was nominated. We took the information, this report, all 20 recommendations, and handed it off to her team, and she directly incorporated it into the 2022 Coast Guard strategy. End result is the only bottom-up service strategy, in effect, across all of the armed services. And I think it's something that the Coast Guard's really proud of, and I think we do really well, that the things that service members across all different cohorts, all different backgrounds and ranks, civilian and active duty, are worried about, what they worry about as individuals. And we looked at, across 10 individual reports, were rolled up and basically copy and pasted into the driver section of what's the risks for the Coast Guard in the Commandant strategy. So that was a really successful application of strategic foresight over the past couple of years. But we needed to realize we also needed to do more. And another key way that Evergreen has evolved over time is taking this very large and very dense report, which is very, I encourage everyone to read it, but it's over 300 pages. So I recognize that a lot of people won't. We realized we need to have impact in the organization, how to take these abstract concepts of future risk and make it a lived experience. And so the team at the RAND Corporation is our partner in this process. And I developed this game called Paratus Futurum, which is a strategic foresight game. We wanted to make the conclusions an experience that you could have in the course of a 6-hour day. And so I really want to get into that a little bit, moving forward in the next couple slides, about how you take the scenarios that we developed, turn it into an experience, and how the organization learns from exercising those experiences. So the results that we have from the pine cones basically yield a bunch of risks and opportunities for senior leadership consideration. You can see the buckets here. You can read, you can read them in the final report. It really comes down to these 5 general areas. Workforce is an issue for not just the Coast Guard, for all the ARP services, and I think most industries and organizations. That came up a lot. Organizational culture, about managing risk and accepting new risk, was a big stuff that came up for recommendations. The incorporation of technology and allowing the agency to give breathing space to different programs and to incorporate new technologies, because technology is changing so fast. The marine transportation system, managing the evolution of ACE navigation and new and GPS and new digital technologies and the digitization of the MTS, as well as the tensions between a global and a local Coast Guard. So the Coast Guard's getting a lot of demand signals for its services around the world, not just in the U.S. And how we are a very resource limited organization, and so a lot of the recommendations around how to balance the tension between the pull signal from the National Security Council and from the White House about to be more present and do wonderful Coast Guard things around the world, but also be able to provide the Coast Guard services to the U.S. public that they've grown to be familiar with and they deserve. And then we also, like I said, utilize strategic gaming to help translate these tensions and risks into a lived experience in the course of a day for Coast Guard leadership. So I knew you guys were talking about scenarios, and I wanted to give you a brief glimpse of what the scenarios that we chose are. There are 4 scenarios that we developed for Evergreen 5 and that we're modifying for Evergreen 6. These scenarios really, I won't get into too much detail on them. Don't want to have you spend a lot of time reading them, but we took the 5 different variables: geopolitics, economy, climate, technology, and society, and did different permutations across all 4. And you see, and we used 4 scenarios to show 4 plausible futures. And we started basically changing the levers on those 5 variables, and resulted in 4 different scenarios. And that took up the first year of Evergreen 5. Again, these scenarios, very fine detail in the scenarios is available in the RAND report for you to download and read at your convenience. So this is what Paratus Futurum looks like. So it's a tabletop game. There's some die, there's poker chips, there's slots for different geographies and missions. You can choose to invest in missions and doing things today, or you can choose to invest in technologies for tomorrow that show up over the next 4 to 8 to 12 years, and you never have enough resources to do everything. So you got to make choices. And so we've been doing this game for the past couple of years. It's been really successful, and it really, like I said, turns these scenarios into a lived experience. Here's kind of a graphic on how we developed Paratus Futurum and how we imply the scenarios in this context. Like I said, we spend the first 2 games were really to kind of make the report a lived experience. We were only intending to play it once. As for Coast Guard senior leadership, they played it, and the first thing they said afterwards was, "Everyone needs to do this." So we are expanding the game, expanding this and trying to turn this into a standard training tool for the organization so that every Coast Guard member will at some point be able to experience what it's like to make tough resourcing decisions over a 20-year time horizon before they have to do it in real life. So what did we learn from Paratus Futurum and doing this strategic game and applying these scenarios? The first thing really is that it's an opportunity for people to collaborate across communities. Many in the Coast Guard, a lot of different communities, be it cuttermen or aviators or people or boat forces staff. They don't really get to think about things other than their day job with people who aren't in their organizations. So it was a great professional development opportunity in that aspect. It really gave people an appreciation for what it's like to be senior leadership and how to make these really hard choices over long term without having all the information that you would love to have when you have to make those resource balancing decisions. And like I said, it gave people the ability to live this experience of making strategic choices before they have to do it in real life, before they're playing with live ammo. And the senior leaders agree that was probably the most valuable professional development application of this game. But we also learned things about recommendations for the organization, how to move forward strategically. And things we learned from playing this game, we've now played it about 10 times, so over 300 people have played it at this point. Some really strong lessons learned for the organization. One, that you got to have and I think, I bring these up because I think these lessons don't only apply to the Coast Guard. I think they're pretty good lessons for any larger organization that's dealing with future risk. So one is you have to set a strategy for the long term, and you got to support it regardless of short-term risk. You basically set a course and keep to it. But the art is in balancing the short-term needs, the pull signals that you're going to get from your stakeholders and from your workforce, the crises that pop up, while keeping the long-term vision in mind. The other thing, there are 2 things I have bullied here because I think those are the ones that stuck out most to me. One is that you got to provide explicit permission to stop doing things that will have to be deprioritized, because you have to make choices in this game, and you have to make choices in the future. You're never going to have enough resources to do everything. It implies a prioritization. Implies if you have priorities that some things aren't priorities, and we learned that we have to do a better job of communicating that the things that aren't a priority, it's okay to not do those anymore, in order to tackle the things that we really think we need to get after to kind of minimize the risks in the future. And the last was that this gaming tool, was really a critical gap for readiness. That this game, as it turns out, was the first time the Coast Guard has done something like this. And leadership is very interested in expanding this tool set. And so one of the child products of Project Evergreen is trying to figure out what is gaming look like for the Coast Guard in the next 10 to 15 years, not just on strategic foresight, but as a tool, as the Admiral said, a risk-free sandbox to explore different ideas and strategies and different plausible features and how you might go down, what decision you might take in different scenarios. So that's something that we're looking at pretty intensely over the next few years. So we talked about Evergreen 5, what we did, and let's talk about a little bit what we're doing moving forward. So Project Evergreen 6, like I described it earlier, is the B cycle. we're doing a deep dive on 4 areas of we call them novel strategic risk, and I'll show those. I'll describe what they are in a little bit. We're going to continue deployment of Paratus Futurum at 4 games per year, and we're going to we're actually going up to Seattle in August and hoping to come to Alaska next year. So we're also going to be leveraging the inertia we've got with gaming and Paratus Futurum, and we're going to start pilot testing gaming as a tool across all topics. So not just strategic foresight, but we're going to pick a topic across the organization and start working out what that looks like for the Coast Guard. We're going to do that through the Evergreen construct. We're also going to have, there's going to be a report which will be publicly available on what the past 2 years of strategic gaming means for the Coast Guard and different permutations on what a gaming program could look like. Again, that'll be available on the RAND website for you guys to read if you're interested, hopefully in the next couple months. We're also going to update Paratus Futurum. So we did the initial work for the game and at Project Evergreen, because based on Project Evergreen 5, which started in 2018, and yeah, there's been a pandemic since then. A couple things have changed. So we're updating Paratus Futurum, and we're going to add some expansion packs. We're going to go, we noticed a lot of different utilities over the course of the 10 games of doing the strategic foresight work, of the use of the tool of this game as a communication tool, that you can bring different stakeholders into this game and experience this plausible features through the scenario planning process, and they learn and appreciate the different risks that you have to do. So you take people. One example is one of the games we took members of the Air Force from Indo-Pacific Command who had no exposure to the Coast Guard whatsoever. And 6 hours later, they came away as the biggest advocates for Coast Guard resourcing and the understanding and appreciating the risks that we face as an organization. So we're going to be experimenting with that a little bit moving forward. An example of that is we're planning on incorporating some of our NATO allies into some of the games and our foresight processes moving into this year. So excited to see how that works out. And then finally, we're gonna take the existing version of Paratus Futurum and we're gonna incorporate it into the training curriculum. Like I said, so every Coast Guard member will get exposure to strategic foresight and strategic gaming as standard practice moving forward. And then that kind of a long-term exposure at relatively junior levels is how you apply a cultural change to the organization. So this is a 20-year project. I hope to have it seen through by the time I retire. But the objective is, over time, you get people used to the idea of thinking that there's not just one plausible future. There's not one preferred future. There's many different plausible outcomes, and that when you have any type of problem, that you can think about it many different ways, and it kind of opens your aperture and makes you and maybe, just maybe, you'll tackle a problem a little differently than just the standard way that you're used to thinking. And so finally, I know I've teased this before, the 4 things that the Coast Guard's worried about over the next 20 years, these are novel risks. We call them novel risks because these are things that the Coast Guard has not strategically tackled before, where there's no written documentation or guidance. You see the 4 things here: seabed security, gray zone competition, space governance, and Antarctica. And I'll note that all 4 of these things definitely have, including Antarctica, an Arctic and Alaska nexus to them. These are things these are areas that we're going to be, with RAND, developing implementation frameworks to help us get after these problems. But as of right now, we are starting more or less from scratch and understanding what do these risks areas mean for the organization over the next 25 years. And I'm sure it may sound a little out there, especially the space governance one. But my general rule of thumb as a practitioner is if you go, you do the work, you do the scenarios, you do the workshops, and these are the things that your clients or your workshop participants are telling you they're worried about, and you present it to senior leadership or whoever the client is, and they laugh a little bit, that means you're doing it right. That means that there's some things that you haven't thought about, that's a blind spot, that's a potential risk area. So we're going to get into these over the next 2 years. The final report will be public. You will be able to see what we end up coming up with. And with that, I look forward to any questions. Thank you for your time. And yeah, happy to have further conversations. You have my emails on there. Please feel free to reach out. Happy to share the knowledge and lessons learned and look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zachary. And Zachary, if you can stay on the line here, we've got a couple of microphones set up, I believe, on the sides of the room here. That one, do I see one over there? Yes. Anyone who might have a question, or for Rear Admiral Dean as well, I'll invite her back up on the stage. Please step up to the microphone and ask any questions. We have someone stepping up right now.
Well, thank you for the information and the presentation. I'm curious how you think about dual use opportunities that might surface in the work that you're doing for the private sector and other economic and innovation-based activities. You're doing some really powerful work that's looking ahead, but it may also be uncovering opportunities for the rest of the economy. And I'm wondering how you think about that dual use opportunity and managing the surfacing of those opportunities and the transfer of those out into a private sector.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks. So there's a couple ways that I think about that. One is very intentionally, everything that we do in Project Evergreen is unclassified. I'd say not everything. 99.5% of everything we do in Project Evergreen is unclassified, not restricted at all. It's for public use. It uses taxpayer money to do this work, and it's your information as well. We are your United States Coast Guard, and we're here to serve you. So yes, these reports are made public. The scenarios are made public. Please use them. If more people use them and validate them, that just makes makes me feel good and validates the work that we do. If there's applicability beyond the Coast Guard, it shows that the power of the foresight that we're doing really is positive impacts on society. And we also, in regards to the dual use technology or the dual use applications, yeah, that's I think generically, this is just me speaking personally, I think we'll all be better off if we apply a little foresight in more areas of society and the economy. I think the human condition is to be reactive, and foresight's hard because it's proactive. You're trying to stay away from the tyranny of the present and the things that are the closest alligators to the boat. And so I think there's the more dual use, the more public application of foresight, the better. And if it just so happens to be our work that is a catalyst for that, I'm happy to have that be the case. Hopefully that answers your question.
Anyone else have any questions? I was just going to ask Zachary, what's the most common pitfalls that people might fall into as they start approaching a project like this? What are some things to watch out for, and what are some general advice you might have if you were to undertake a process like this? Yeah,
well, first off, I'd say read the Evergreen report, because we designed it to be a how-to guide on how to do a process and lessons learned. So, like I keep mentioning the tyranny of the present. It's very hard, particularly in a military organization that has a lot of demands placed on it, to think beyond the next 15-minute increment, the next crisis, and you intentionally have people to invite people to these workshops and say, okay, take 2 days out of your day job, of which you never have enough time to do everything, and think about things that you probably won't ever see, right? Because you'll be retired by the time some of these things come out. That's really hard, because people think like, why am I investing the time and effort? Or they may feel like they invest, but it turns out after they go throughout the first, let's say 90 minutes of a workshop, they fall in love with it, and they recognize the power of what they're doing, the ability to impact strategic change on an organization. And so to help facilitate that, we have a couple of best practices. One is never do it in your office, always go off-site. Get people, like physically remove people from their day jobs, because otherwise they're gonna be too tempted by emails, they're looking at their phones, they're gonna be, there's gonna be meetings they're gonna wanna duck out for. Get them out of the office. In the military organization, one of the things that we do is we have people show up in civilian clothes, because if you remove the uniform, it removes a lot of the apprehension that some of the junior members may have in addressing senior leaders. So one of the great examples I have, and one of the great joys of the Prospect term experience, was when we had a very junior member talking to a 2-star admiral, and the junior member was convinced that the Coast Guard should privatize search and rescue in the year 2040, right? That they were convinced that by 2040 that would happen, and the 2-star admiral was absolutely convinced that would never happen. And boy, did I wish I had some popcorn, because those were some fireworks going. But it shows the power of the foresight process, that it was a safe environment to have the conversation. And most organizations, Coast Guard very much included, doesn't really have that many opportunities for members across ranks and across backgrounds to have these open-ended strategic conversations. So I guess some early recommendations: get people out of the office and make it abundantly clear that your workshops are for everyone to participate in, regardless of rank and background, and make sure that they understand it's a safe space. I know that phrase is used and sometimes misused in modern culture, but it really is important that people feel they have the ability to speak their mind, especially when it comes to long-term risks, because more often than not, it's the people who have very different backgrounds and experiences from you that will have the strategic insight that you will have never thought of just because you didn't live their life. So yeah, those are a couple of things I'd offer.
Any other questions out there? I have one more. I'm just fascinated with the game that you developed, and it looks really ingenious to get people involved by playing a game. Is there ways that you feel that people in other organizations could modify that or could create their own game, or is there a simple version of that people could use in their own organizations?
Yes, there is. It's like I said, everything we do is public. You can read the gaming report when it comes out. You can read the Evergreen 5 final report. It's all there. There's nothing that you can't manufacture the game in by yourself and do it. I will say gaming, and I am not a gaming expert. I am the foresight process led me to understand that gaming is a capability the Coast Guard will need. So I'm learning very, very slowly about gaming. But there are organizations, nonprofits that are research and development corporations that will that do this type of work, that are contracted. So if you're interested in gaming, there's a couple of avenues. You can go with them. You could take our game and modify it, but I would say that games should be designed for their intended purpose. One of the lessons that we're learning from our experience with gaming is like I said, this game was only designed to be played once as a lived experience for this report, for the Evergreen 5 report. But because it was so impactful to the senior leadership, and they said everyone should do it, we're now taking this lived experience of report and turning it into a training tool and a strategic simulation tool. And we're starting to find where it's breaking, right? Because we're asking it to do things that it was never designed to do. So absolutely, please use our game as a model. But I would strongly suggest thinking about, what do you really want to get after the game, and prioritize out of the game that you're doing, the particular activity, and prioritize that rather than trying to just copy and paste our model, design the tool for what you need it to do rather than using someone else's tool for a different job. I guess that's what I'll say.
Admiral Dean, is there any other closing thoughts that you might have, or anything else you'd like to address? Well, we have about 2 more minutes left here. Oh, one more question. Sorry, I missed you.
Sorry, no, I was just, the one thing about this presentation, I wanted to know how you guys approach this. We've got a couple days of scenario thinking here at the conference, but how do you keep the scenarios that you're considering within the plausible? I use the words good idea fairy a lot, and I picture a room where people come together to try to brainstorm all the scenarios, and they're going to be able to think of a lot, and most of them are not plausible. But then you might, if you keep it too on the straight and narrow, you're going to miss the pandemic, like you said you guys did. So how do you keep it in the right sweet spot?
So a couple things. One, I will say we did not miss the pandemic. We caught it. It's in the Evergreen 5 scenarios, and people thought we were nuts when we did it. There's never going to be another pandemic. It's all going to be. There's not going to be uncontrolled disease because we have so much modern tools and modern technology, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we all know how that turned out. But to your main point, how do you keep things in the plausible? It's an art, I will say. We use in the workshops, we use the principles of human-centered design. One of the common brand names is Luma, Luma. Trying to get organize people with Post-it notes in different rooms, and they are in different groups, and the facilitators in those workshops, having them trained up on foresight and having them understand letting the art of allowing people to talk and bring up the crazy good idea fairies, but also being able to synthesize everything at the end of the day. It is an art. And so yeah, you'll get some crazy ideas, but that's why you have professionals on the back end and in the room to apply some judgment to the final analysis and the consolidated data to produce the report. So yeah, we've got, if you look at a scatter plot of all the different suggestions and risks that we identified as part of the 300 people that participated, there's some ones that are really far out there. But when you look at the ones that are repeated multiple times, that's the ones we kind of feel like we should focus on, because you're never going to have enough resources to get tracked down everything, right? So it's like it's a little bit of art in the facilitation and data analysis portion, and some judicious exercise of administrative control over the process. That's how you get around that. But it's a great question.
Thank you.
Time is up.
No.
Any other thoughts?
Just want to say thank you all again. Appreciate the invitation and allowing the Coast Guard to take up a little bit of your day. And Zach, I look forward to having you out here in Juneau in the not too distant future. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Admiral. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Zachary Schulman and Rear Admiral Megan Dean from the Coast Guard.